Listen now for the word of the Lord in this long and familiar story from the Gospel of Luke. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would have gladly filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let us pray. May the words of my lips and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I returned back to seminary after Christmas break and found a letter from the bank. It just looked like it was going to be a bad letter. And I opened it up, and sure enough, I had overdrawn my account. Several checks that I had written had bounced. I was mortified. I had never done anything like this before in my life. I was horribly embarrassed. But I got to thinking, I am sure that I made a deposit right before I left for Christmas break. I looked at the form they sent me, and there was no indication of that deposit on there at all. So I rummaged through my paperwork, and sure enough, I found the receipt for that deposit on the day before I left for spring break. So you know what I did, don't you? I got angry, and I decided I am going to go down there and straighten this bank out. So for the rest of that day and almost all of that night, I rehearsed my story, right? I thought of exactly the words I wanted to use to make them apologize to me, to feel bad for what they have done to me. I was ready and armed, and I was going to go in there, and I was going to hit them with both barrels, and I was going to get an apology. All night long, I rehearsed that story over and over and over again. Well, the next day, I was there when the bank opened, and I walked in, and the lady said, "Can I help you?" I said, "I have an issue with my account," and she pointed towards this little office. So I walked over to the little office, and I set on this lady's desk the receipt of my deposit and the statement that I had received from the bank, and I started in with my rehearsed speech. And I got about 3 words in, and she said, "Oh, I am so sorry. We obviously made a mistake. Don't worry about it. We will fix it all." And I have to admit, I was just a little bit disappointed. I mean, I had this speech worked up. It was a good one. Would have made her feel really bad for what they did to me. And she took it away from me by her graciousness. You ever do that? You ever anticipate a conversation? Maybe it's an apology. Maybe it's a confrontation. Maybe it's where you need to explain yourself. You ever have those moments when you're anticipating this conversation, and over and over and over again in your mind, you go over the words you're going to say so you have them exactly the way you want to say them? You ever do that? If you have, then you will understand this story. It's a familiar story. In fact, a little bit too familiar. It's no picnic for preachers when we get the prodigal son or the Good Samaritan. Everybody knows those stories. If you went to Sunday school, you'll learn those stories. If you're my age, you'll learn the stories on a flannel graph. You've heard the stories over and over and over again. They get a little limp, a little weak, because you know what the preacher's going to say. But this is a great story. Charles Dickens said this was the best story ever written. So we can't just push it aside. We got to listen to hear what God has to say for us today in this story. And here's what I believe. I believe that the title you give to the story affects how you hear the story. What you call this passage determines how you hear the point of the passage. Now, we have all been taught all of our lives that the title of the story is The Prodigal Son. And so when we go to hear the story of the prodigal son, our focus is upon the one who wanders away. And maybe that's your story. Maybe you know exactly what that is like, to be in a place that you move away from and regret that you've left so deeply that you can't wait to come home. It's a good sermon. We all love a good redemption story, don't we? Somebody who sees the light, recognizes the error of their ways, and is brought back into the fold. If you hear this story as the prodigal son, then you're going to ask yourself, where have I wandered away? But the younger son is not the only main character in the story, right? There are 2 other main characters in the story. One of them is his brother, his older brother, the oldest son. I am literally and figuratively the oldest son. I'm 4 years older than my brother, Kurt, and had all the things that happen to the older child. You have any older children here? Firstborn? Yeah. You know all about it, right? You're responsible. The rules were very clear. Punishment much harsher. Expectations far deeper. And by the time the second and the third and the fourth kids came along, they picked up the blinky off the floor, wiped it on the shirt, and handed it to you. I mean, they lost all of that sense of sort of deep and profound responsibility. I lived my life carrying that burden. In fact, I think the only real benefit of being a first child is you have a lot more pictures of yourself in the family photo albums. I mean, by the time the second and third child came along, they were lucky to get a school photo and a Christmas picture. I mean, that was about it. We had all kinds of pictures the first one, but you learn to live with this deep sense of responsibility, and you carry it throughout your life. I am literally the older son, but I am figuratively the older son too. And I suspect almost everyone in this room is as well. Baptized as a child, raised in the church. I went to Sunday school and vacation Bible school. I went on mission trips and sang in the youth choir best as I could. I was active in district Methodist activities. The church was the center of my life. We built our lives around activity in the life of the church. And the most prodigal I ever got was to miss 2 weeks in a row in college because I slept in on a Sunday morning. I never left the church. I have a shoebox full of perfect Sunday school attendance pins. How about you? I mean, you're here, right? I mean, you've read all the articles in the paper on this side of the pandemic. Church attendance is down about half. But look at you guys. You're here. I mean, some people, they just got out of the habit, and some people are still afraid of being out in crowds, and some people have found it very comfortable to sit in their jammies with a cup of coffee and watch it on TV or online, and others have just drifted away. But you're here. You're here. So what's all the fuss about these people that wait 50 or 60 years and show up in the church? Why are we always so enamored of those folks who wander in the doors years after not being a part of the community of faith? Doesn't what we've done count for something? I mean, shouldn't we get some extra credit? Some brownie points? Some stars in our crown? I mean, isn't there some value in being the person that never left, that tended the fields, that did the work of the church, all those committees you served on and teams you've served on and mission trips you've attended and Sunday school classes you've taught? All those things ought to count for something, right? We are the older child. If you call this the story of the oldest son, you understand why there is anger and disappointment. But you know what I believe? I believe that this story is not either about the younger son or the older son. I believe this story is about the Father, the loving Father, the merciful Father, the forgiving Father. And I figured that out when I was reading the passage again and realized that the high point of the passage occurs when the father doesn't let the son give his rehearsed story, right? I mean, you can imagine what that son was like coming back from that distant land. He was going over that story again and again and again in his mind. This is my last chance. This is my only hope. I've got to get out of this deep poverty. I've got to find food to eat. I've got to be cared for in some way. Over and over and over again, he's going over this story. He will make his excuses. He will give his apologies, and things will be made okay. But while he was still far off, the father saw him and ran towards him. Aristotle once said that great men don't run. In the ancient world, it would have been embarrassing for a grown man to run, but the father did not care because it seems he'd been watching every day, hoping to see his son come home. Every day he looked down that distant road, hoping to see his son. And before His son could give him the story before his son could make an excuse, before his son could offer an apology. That father was running towards his son, wrapping his arms around him, kissing him. And even though the son tried to give the apology, the father interrupted him and said, we're going to have a party. We are going to have a party. He got the fatted calf and the ring and the robe and the whole deal. Over the top, extravagant, reckless. But he couldn't do anything else. Nate Allen tells a story about a couple that he knew, Roger and Sally. They were married. They had 2 beautiful young daughters. But there was something just missing from their lives. Roger had been married very briefly before he married Sally and had a daughter. He had never seen her, never touched her, never held her. But he had a picture of her, of a little baby in a baby bathtub that he carried with him everywhere he went. He told his family about this half-sister that they had. They were curious about her, wondered about her, but he spent all of his life wondering if he would ever see her. They moved 38 times in 41 years, Roger and Sally did. And every time they moved, he thought, maybe in this place, I'll see her. After a while, it became available online to try to search for someone that you had lost in your family. And he went to that website and began to do some searching. He said every once in a while he'd get a phone call and he could see it was from that group, and he would answer the phone excitedly, and they just had some more questions to ask. But one day they called. They said they found Victoria. Through this group, he arranged to see if she wanted to see him. He wasn't going to see her if she didn't want to, but she did want to, and they arranged to meet in Atlanta. He said it was a difficult journey from Seattle to Atlanta. I had to take a ferry and a shuttle and a plane and a layover and a plane and another shuttle before I got to the motel where she was staying. He said, but when I saw her, all I could say was, I found her. I found her. I stopped the clerk at the desk, the maid in the hallway, anybody who would listen to me. I found her, I found her, I found her. All I could do was think about the joy I had by finding her again. We had to throw a party. The father in this story throws a party. The older son's right. It's wasteful. It's reckless. It's over the top, extravagant. You know, we have a word for that in the English language. You know what that word is? Prodigal. This is not the story of the prodigal son. This is the story of the prodigal father, who was wasteful and extravagant and reckless in love. This is not a story about an older angry son or a younger prodigal son. This is the story about the father that loved both of them and refused to stop loving them, even when they wandered away. Tom Long tells the story of, he read an article about this woman who talked about her life and her family. She was Daddy's girl, and they were very close growing up. Whenever they went to a family event there in the upper Midwest, at some point somebody would drag out the record player, and at some point in the evening, they would play the beer barrel polka. And he would always say to her, I believe this is our dance. And across the floor they would dance. Well, that lasted until she became a teenager. They went to one event and they started to play the beer barrel polka. And she said, don't touch me. And she ran away. Began to fall apart, their relationship. She couldn't wait to get to college, to be away from her father, to be away from her family. They embarrassed her, mortified to be around them. And after she went to college, she just stopped communicating, stopped talking to her father. But after a while, she began to miss him. She got wind of a family event, and she snuck in the side door. And when they put on the beer barrel polka, she walked over and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "I believe this is our dance." And he turned and looked at her and said, "I've been waiting for you." Let's stand as we sing our final hymn together.